and welcome to Season 2 of So Now What with Gates Cambridge, a podcast tackling some of the world's wicked problems with those who are dedicated to doing something about them. I'm Catherine Galloway, and my guests, as always, are Gates Cambridge scholars working to make an impact in the lives of others. But how do you make an impact on the things that matter in an increasingly crowded, divisive, argumentative, and even untruthful information age? How do you focus attention on the hard, scary things when attention spans are getting shorter by the second? There are now more than 5 billion active social media users in the world, scrolling and sharing and liking and hating day and night, whilst billions more have access to hardly any content at all. The original social network, Facebook, turns 21 this month, and my guests today aren't really all that much older than that, but they've made it their life's work to ditch that infamous quick and easy energy and instead got really creative in a bid to cut through the chaos and ask, how do we get the big important stuff heard in an increasingly noisy world? I'm delighted to be sharing the Zoom studio today with Jakub Szomalec, Gates Cambridge class of 2009, speaking to us from Wolfville, Nova Scotia in Canada, Raggenhilde Fregdaler, Gates Cambridge class of 2013, dialing in from Bergen in Norway, and Jansu Karabiak, joining us from New York and a member of the 2016 Gates Cambridge cohort. Thank you all so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Jakub, whether you're writing a best-selling thriller or an immersive video game storyline, you're thinking about the impact of technology on democracy. You came to Cambridge for a PhD in classics, but wrote a crime novel set in the ancient world alongside your thesis, and the rest, as they say, was history. Your hit cyber thriller, The Hidden Web, has just been made into a film, and gamers around the world have got lost in Cyberpunk 2077, for which you were the principal writer. But even as you entertain, you are educating, asking us all to think about how much power we've already handed over to big tech. Raggenhilde, you're a social anthropologist with a PhD in polar studies, and you realise that to get vital academic research on the climate across to a broader public, you had to move us, emotionally and physically, onto the ice. The play you were an assistant director for, The Trial of the Century, about petroleum extraction in the Barents Sea, won the Norwegian Critics Association Prize in 2016, and you continue to pair arts and academia in your work, convinced that's the way for real change to occur at scale. And Jansu, you're a neuroscientist, deep into a PhD in medical science and thinking all day about Parkinson's disease when you also discovered the stand-up comedy scene at Cambridge. You then used your stand-up platform quite literally to found the non-profit Laugh for Change, raising funds to support refugees in Greece and shift our response to any newly arrived stranger in our midst. Now, clearly, there's so much to dive into here, but to get us started, I'd love you all to tell me the one thing that you're bringing to the table today that's going to help us begin. Jansu, let's start with you because I'm kind of hoping it's going to be a wicked one-liner.
Oh, I wish that was true, but I do live in New York, and I'm bringing a bit of apprehension in a post-election world, so I'm not sure how fun that is.
So apprehension for a Trump presidency underway. Thank you very much. What about you, Raggenhilde? What are you bringing to the table?
I'm bringing a bit of anger or frustration, I think. So yesterday, the board of one of the university colleges in Norway decided to cut the performing arts education that has been a key kind of lead to success for 30 years. And in a lot of municipalities within the bigger cities in Norway, the arts are facing cuts of grants and closure of theatres, not properly supporting the independent arts field. And you'd think a social democracy in peacetime would do better. But it seems we need to step up our communication of how important and vital the arts are to all parts of society and how we really need it in the times that we're living in.
That is enraging, Raggenhilde. Thank you for bringing that sense of anger, because I think we really need to hold on to it. Jakub, what about you?
I'm feeling grateful for my community, for the people of Nova Scotia, people of Wolfville, and I'm grateful that I have this little nook of the world I can hide in and hopefully weather this out. and that I don't know the feelings of kindness and openness and friendship live on here. And I hope this isn't forever what we're experiencing right now on a more broader global scale.
Thank you very much, all of you. Now, I was going to get into this a bit later, but given what you've all brought to the table, I'm going to ask you now. I think it's fair to say there's definitely a snobbery about creative methods in so-called serious research, right? But there's also so much data to show that it does actually work in raising awareness and prompting action on difficult things. So can I ask each of you in 30 seconds or less to make the case, or no, in 1 minute or less, to make the case for why we should keep funding creative work in academia, creative work to tackle these big, wicked problems? Raggenhilde, why don't you go?
I think a lot of the times that we face wicked problems in research and in society in general, we get stuck also in our old methods. And I think the arts is a key to open up new spaces for deliberation and action. And for, a lot of the works that I've been involved in are spaces to experience differences together, be alongside someone in the audience who you might disagree with, or you listen to different sides of perspectives on the world and on our future, or you feel climate change on your body in a way that we can't, because climate change scientifically is a phenomenon over time and not something that happens to individuals here and now. But through the arts, you can expand our understanding of both what climate change is and to make us feel and understand both the problem and the possible solutions differently.
Thank you. Jansu, what about you? You must have raised a few eyebrows when you said, I'm going to talk about the refugee crisis through comedy. But how does it work? Why does it work?
It works because comedy is that tool. You can relay a message, making people laugh and think about it in a different way. I think we're taught through our education and through our lives to have this linear way of thinking about everything, and comedy allows you to approach a problem in a creative way and think about the world in a unexpected way, which is what makes it fun. But then that effect lasts a little longer. You take it home with you afterwards and you think about it. So I think comedy definitely is an important tool that we should, spread out more.
What about you, Jakub?
Well, I think we humans are primed to respond to stories, and stories make things personal and they activate empathy. And I think for us to care about problems, we have to respond emotionally to them. So, understanding on an intellectual level that a problem exists is important, and we, of course, have to work on that aspect too, like to identify the root causes and to figure out how to address it. But I think we also need to respond emotionally to it. And I think arts are the best tool to create those stories or those images, those melodies that affect our hearts and make us care.
I obviously absolutely agree with all of that. And yet, as you say, Raggenhilde, all of you, the funders aren't getting that message, the people who are funding programs. But what's beautiful about what you do, Jakub and Jansu, is that you found new spaces where funders aren't involved. You've brought it directly to people through different routes. Jakub, I had to look up the definition of cyberpunk ahead of this interview, and I helpfully found a description by you talking about it as a genre that, quote, explores what a sudden technological advance does to a broken society. Now, on the basis of that, clearly, we absolutely are living in a cyberpunk world right now and need to be asking these questions, and fast. But here we do seem to be moving into a space where entertainment could lead to cultural activism. How do you see that playing out?
Well, I think entertainment has a role to play in this fast-changing world we happen to be living in, because things are moving at such a pace that it's very hard to stay abreast of what's going on, even if that's your, I don't know, professional life. If all that you're doing is trying to figure out what's going on, where things are headed, I think it's overwhelming the amount of change that we're experiencing. Like it's hard to understand like what's happening and like what the technology that already exists brings to the table and what might happen tomorrow. And I think it's a very dangerous thing to stop understanding the world because it breeds fear, it breeds frustration, and it opens us up to manipulation. And I think entertainment, well, of course, you know, as the name implies, it should bring some joy or some fun into people's lives and experiences. But I think as entertainers, it is also a part of our calling to try to grapple with important themes and try to process, think on the key challenges of the day. And for me, such thing or such area of focus is technology. Yeah, and to try to pinpoint and define and write about the ways in which it affects our lives and changes the world we inhabit. Because the sooner we understand it, the better chances we have of doing something about it.
Am I right in thinking that as a sort of frustrated parent watching a teenager gaming, you might think it's all very passive, but the video gaming world does allow you to take some agency to make decisions in the game that might make you feel comfortable or uncomfortable? And does that translate then to activism in the real world somehow?
Well, I have no idea if it translates into activism. I'd like to think that it does, but I have no data to support this claim. But what I know is that games are an extremely broad medium, and there are games that are meaningless, and there are games that are deeply meaningful. And I know that the cornerstone of gaming is interactivity and choice. And I know that choice is an extremely important part of human experience. I think to live is to choose. And I think by getting to experience those choices in a virtual world and see the consequences they bring, make you think about the story you're experiencing on a deeper level. So I do think that the games are a great medium for kind of fine-tuning our moral compasses and making us engage with problems. And that's what I try to do in my work as a video game writer, even if I'm working on a commercial project that is also has to be a viable product at the end of the day. But I do try to infuse it with meaning and make sure it's not just a bit of mouthwash.
Thank you. What you said as a way to develop your moral compass through play, I think is really striking. And Jansu, if I could turn to you now, you are Kurdish, you grew up in Denmark, and you've also worked as a volunteer in the refugee camps in Chios in Greece several times. And that's the experience which led you to set up Laugh for Change. But you didn't take your own identity as a stateless person or the topic of the global refugee crisis in general into your stand-up set until quite recently. So I'm curious to know, what was the moment that you decided to do it, and what was the result when you did?
I think over time now it's been 8 years of comedy, and initially stand up gave me the agency to push for this project that I cared about, and I could make other people care. And I saw how that spread and how it was so useful, and how we could put on a show and raise thousands of pounds for shoes for refugee kids in an island in Greece, right? So I saw the effects of that, and then as I continued as a stand-up comic, I got braver, and I could start talking about things that affected me as a person, and things that my own vulnerabilities, not just my strengths, but my vulnerabilities. So That's how I started talking about being Kurdish on stage without fear of being targeted by governments in other countries that would not like you talking about being Kurdish.
And what happened then, the first moment that you mentioned it, that very first show where you thought, I'm going to go there, and you went there? Did you feel something in you shifted or the audience shifted?
It was very empowering. It was the fact that, my first question was, clap if you have heard about Kurdish people. And just to see that, that was 20% of the audience had heard about Kurdish people, it gave me so much pleasure to then just start talking about being Kurdish and what that meant, and then, write a joke around it that made people laugh, because I felt they would now remember who Kurdish people were.
That's astonishing. Raggenhilde, so your play, The Trial of the Century, had real people involved in that contested drilling in the Norwegian Barents Sea who were playing themselves in the play. You had young climate activists on stage, you had lawyers and politicians in front of a community audience. That were the community that was going to be most directly affected by this issue. And you had them sitting on a set made of ice. They did literally feel the issue in their bodies, viscerally, in the same way that somebody laughing at a joke, that's a physical response, right? In the same way as a gamer in an immersive world feels that in their bodies, the raising heart rate, the chasing, the excitement, the doubt, all of those emotions, you feel it physically. And Raggenhilde, I'm interested in what the actors and the audience members told you about that experience afterwards. How did it change things for them to literally live it physically rather than just intellectually?
Yeah, I think maybe for one of the people particularly that was involved, who is an employee in the petroleum industry, who works for a union, and we invited him to be one of the witnesses in the court case, and he's not a person who belongs to the art world, so to speak, and he found it a kind of really encouraging space to be in, even though there was disagreement of the views of different sides and all of this. There was this physical joining together where he also entered one of the sports stores in Kirkenes to buy a hat because he'd left it at home, and then he said it was in his play, and then someone was having a debate by the counter over the issues of the Barents Sea, precisely because our play was in town, and so it created a lot of spin-offs as well. And this idea of sitting outside together in the cold, it was -10 when we were doing the play, created this heightened sense of that it mattered. The play lasted like an hour and a half over 3 different nights before the audience voted, and it was this sense of urgency in a way. Like, people really felt they needed to come on the final day to be part of the decision to be made, like yes or no to further petroleum development, and really, made people care.
That's extraordinary. When we were talking ahead of meeting today, we talked about speed, because comedians are some of the quickest thinkers I know. They have to be so reactive. And we talked a little bit about attention spans and how those were shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. And Jakub, you'll know this too as a gamer. Do we somehow have to adapt our messaging on the big stuff to catch this ever decreasing attention span of wider society? And if we do, what impact might that have? If we manage to get quicker and more bite-sized and better, does that necessarily mean dumbing down? Or could that potentially open some more opportunities for connection?
It's interesting because as an academic, it goes against my nature to say we should explain this problem in 3 minutes or less on TikTok. So that it feels wrong, but it's effective. I've seen it work, and I've seen how people we've seen demonstrations here for a year now, and a lot of that has happened through social media, and been through a couple of people with influence and the ability to tell a problem, and as Jakub said, make people feel and care about the issues, and then rally around and spread the message. And social media is a quicker way of spreading a message out. Unfortunately, can also be misinformation, right? But also the positive things that we want to send out there. So there's a lot of power in it. There's a lot of potential. It's a little scary, but it can do a lot.
Jakub, I know that you're thinking hard about how much power we've already given away, to big data, to big tech, and you're encouraging people to take ownership of that problem. What has been the most effective way that you have found to do that, apart from gaming?
Well, a very old school way, by writing books. And I agree that we have to adapt, and sometimes we have to try to spread the word or get our message out in 60 seconds. But personally, I find it easier when I'm not rushing to say my piece. And I think books are a fantastic way of creating a whole world and then inviting the reader to stay there for a while, to let whatever you have to say really sink in, to transport them for a little bit. So I would say that any work of art that makes you pause, makes you step away from your daily grind and to forget for a second where you are and what you're supposed to do. I think that's what works the best in my experience. So even though on some level, I guess I represent the world of new technologies as much as I criticize it because I work in video games. I think focus and slowing down and thinking slowly is very important. Nevertheless, even in the world of TikToks and Instagram stories.
I love that contrast from both of you, because Raggenhilde, you're kind of right in the middle of it, aren't you? You're sort of doing the long, slow, hard thinking work, the immersive work as a researcher, but then you've got the hour and a half to try and move hearts and minds along with you. I keep coming back to Hamlet when I think about you and your play that you put on, and his famous line, "The play's the thing wherein I'll catch the conscience of the king." And I wondered, what have you learned from working with creatives that has made you in some ways a better academic? What are the tips and tricks that we can steal from the artists and the comedians and the gamers that will help us apply our knowledge in a more meaningful and in a more impactful way?
Well, I think both from this play and from other projects that I've worked on, letting go is important in the sense that you don't have control over what the audience takes away. And we don't as academics either. You can have your perfect PowerPoint presentation and your 20 minutes to talk, or you can have like your 6,000 or 8,000 word article that you've carefully crafted every sentence. You have no power over what people take away from it at the end of the day. Of course, you have some power in how you communicate it, but particularly when you go into collaborations with creatives, the work takes different directions, and you go, "Oh yeah, but this is really important," and they go, "Yeah, we see that, but this is how it's going to work with an audience," and so you have to kind of go into that with an acceptance that the outcome might be different from what you thought or from what they thought as well. You create something new that hasn't been in the world before, and that is exciting, and also creates the possibility for you to expand as an academic or as a researcher or as a human being as well, because these are professional communicators, and there's always a lot to learn from that.
I've interviewed quite a few academics of late, and, they do have this vast amount of knowledge, and yet they do sometimes what we journalists call bury the lead, which is your top line, your top story, the thing that will make somebody at home sit up and go, "Wait, what?" They put that sort of, PowerPoint slide number 17, and you're like, no, you've just buried the lead. No. Jansu, that must be part of your work as a comedian, is finding that lead, finding the thing that's going to arrest everybody's attention and say, no, we do need to talk about the refugee crisis. We do need to talk about statelessness. How did you find that in telling that story?
Gosh, it's a good question. I think the more you care, the more you can make others care. And if you come in with that passion and you have a premise, it might be a joke, but you have a solid premise. It's something that you care about, and the audience will pay attention to you because you're so passionate about it. If you don't believe in your own bits on stage, they're not going to work, right? You lose the audience loses confidence in you immediately. At least in my experience. I also thought actually, Ragnar, there was something really interesting you said about waiting for what the audience is going to take away. I started acting school this year, and I have to say that difference between acting and comedy is just so stark, because with comedy the gratification is instant. You know immediately, did the audience listen? Did they take away what I wanted them to take away? Whereas with acting, you could it's grueling, just, having to hear it afterwards. And it definitely lets you, loosen up and learn to let go, because that then has fed into my comedy as well, to be even more brave with what you write, because at the end of the day, you can't control, you can control the joke, but you can't control what the audience takes away.
I'm thinking, Jakub, you know exactly when you're designing a game experience or a novel, you're crafting something, you're doing the scaffolding, you're creating the structure, you're controlling the narrative. You know exactly what you want people to think and feel and do, don't you?
Yes and no. When I'm writing books, I definitely have more control over how the story develops because I control the pacing. The story is linear. There's only one way for it to go. When it comes to video games, there's always an element of choice, and the games I tend to work on put a lot of emphasis on choice. And that also means that there are some bits of the story you might choose not to engage with at all, or there are some that you may complete, but without like truly connecting with the underlying message, because you start, I don't know, skipping dialogues, for example. And it also depends on your audience, like what intent they have. Like, are they waiting to be moved, or are they there just to have a good time?
Yeah, if I'm right in thinking, there was a very specific pinpoint moment in your life, a real fork in the road, when you'd been considering the classical world, ancient history for a long time, and you didn't think developments in tech or the new in the digital space appealed to you or applied to you at all. There was one moment that you thought, gosh, I need to pivot and tackle this now. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it was a very striking moment where I felt I really have to think about new technologies a little bit more. And it was when I was on my parental leave. So I was spending half a year with my daughter, who was then 6 months old. And as many young children, she needed to nap a lot. So I would take her out for walks and listen to podcasts. And I remember listening to a podcast like that, by complete kind of coincidence, about how new technology is used to spread pedophile pornography. And I was not emotionally ready. Like, I was not prepared to listen about this. It's not something I set out to listen about. So, like, it really hit me in the gut. And I was listening to all this while I was pushing the pram with my daughter in it. And I thought, wow, like, I brought you into this world. I don't understand it myself. And it is my responsibility to explain it to you. And I feel that's something my parents were unable to do. Like, they have no experience dealing with computers, no experience dealing with the internet, no experience dealing with social media. So my generation was just left to, engage with it and discover what it means to live in a truly digital, interconnected world by ourselves. And there's plenty to be grateful and excited for. But there are elements of it that, are scary or difficult. And I felt very deeply at that moment that as a parent, it is my role to try to make sense of this world. Also, like the things I don't like see, because that's the tricky part about the digital world. A lot of it is just intangible. Like you can't touch it, you can't smell it, you can see it. And in order to understand it, you have to think in abstract ways that often kind of elude the common sense or like our understanding of the physical world. My favorite example is like, when you load up a website, it takes half a second or maybe less. And while that happens, there's an auction going on between thousands of bots trying to figure out who gets to display their ad to you. And they do so by analyzing your data and seeing what your profile is and, what's your gender, what's your socioeconomic status, what are your interests. And so they kind of have that, lightning fast auction to see if you'll see an ad for a holiday or for a car or for a new computer. And it's so counterintuitive. We are really not made to understand that things can happen so quickly, and that we can be kind of taken apart and analyzed so efficiently by something that doesn't register in our kind of vision at all. So I thought that moment. Okay, ancient Greeks and ancient Romans, they were a lot of fun, and there's still much we can learn from that time and that place. But I have to engage with what's around me.
Well, that seems to lead us on rather perfectly, Jakub, to our So Now What, because we've got to send people listening to this podcast, wherever they're listening to it and with whoever they're listening to it with, out into the world, back out into reality and say, come on, roll your sleeves up, let's do something. So could you all give me a takeaway that we could apply today that would help you in your quest and in your research and in your work to make a difference? Kansu, you're smiling. I'm going to ask you.
I was just thinking, go to a comedy show, but not, to a particular one. Like find the, minority-led, women of color, LGBT run comedy show and see what people actually think and talk about. Not just, a generic comedy club, but something that people have put care into and where they want to talk about the things they go through in life. And I think minorities often do that really well because they don't have a lot of spaces. And, we're all often tokenized. I'll often be the only woman on a lineup, or I'll be the only brown person on a lineup. So that would be my advice to everybody out there. And it's a tool that makes you happy and it alleviates depression. So there's so many benefits to it.
Thank you very much. I feel I should mention you can find Jansu on Instagram under @Jansu Comedy. That's spelled CANSU Comedy. Jansu Comedy. So we can check you out and many others. And thank you for that. Yes, indeed. Shake it up, get out of your comfort zone and learn something from a fresh perspective. What about you, Raggenhilde? What are you going to send us away with?
I want to send you away with a call to defend your local arts institution if it's under attack or when it will be under attack, but also to find community. I think is really important at the stage of the world that we're in. Make sure that you know who your community is and build it. But in the more general sense of the topics of the conversation, I think to go see things that maybe is a little bit outside of what you thought you were interested in, and to experience them and to talk to people who are outside of your academic sphere or your friend zone, or to kind of try to move across the borders and boundaries that we kind of get stuck with in everyday life and in our professional lives as well, because that's where these like really fruitful encounters happen, where we can actually shake things up and maybe see the world differently and have different stories for the future that can build a better future.
I mean, nowhere is more evident than on this Zoom call. My goodness, we've got a neuroscientist who is also a stand-up comedian. We've got a polar researcher who is also a theatre director and writer, and we've got a scholar of a scholar of classics who's now writing video games and cyberpunk novels. I mean, it's just perfect. If there's ever an advert for thinking outside of the realm that you exist in most of the time, outside your day job, I mean, this is it. This podcast is it. Jakub, what are you going to send us away with?
I think I would reinforce a message that has already been put out there. Just talk to people. And we touched upon the topic of social media, which I really believe is not a good platform for any sort of a conversation. So I would say go talk to real people in the real world. Being open to what they have to say, because I just think we have too little of it. And I think if we all found space in our lives to be honest and vulnerable at the same time talking to other people, we'd maybe get along better.
That's beautiful. Thank you very much indeed. And that's it for this episode. So huge thanks to my guests today. Jakub Szomalec, the novelist and video game writer, currently narrative director at the game development studio Rebel Wolves. Social anthropologist and polar expert Raggenhilde Fregdaler, senior researcher at the Western Norway Research Institute. And Jansu Karabiak, scientific advisor at pharmaceutical company Eli Lilly, and stand-up comedian and founder of the Laugh for Change non-profit. It's been pure creative joy and a huge personal pleasure to sit down with all three of you today. My thanks too to producers Mandy Garner from Gates Cambridge and Nick Saffel from the Central Communications Office at the University of Cambridge. And of course, thanks to all of you for listening, settling in now to our second season. So do let us know what you think. I'm Catherine Galloway, and this is So Now What with Gates Cambridge. Join us again next time for another wicked problem dissected by those determined to do something about it.